welcome to Women at Work by Hay, Episode 1, Season 6. We're back after 5 full seasons interviewing female designers from all around the world. We're back for another year to continue building what we believe is a fairer and more equitable present and future. These are not comfortable times for feminism. It's not as trendy as it used to be years ago when studios and festivals and companies and brands and institutions, they all wanted to wear like a purple badge to display as a trophy. With the rise of extreme right movements and totalitarian governments, it seems that speaking up for women, minorities, trans lives, migrants and overall social justice and environment is becoming a risky move. We, however, see it as a privilege and therefore a responsibility we still have. Because, as we always say, those who design the world give things the shape they consider best. The more diverse the designer landscape, the more inclusive the world would be. How boring it would be if only white, rich men dictated how reality should be, right? There's still space for resistance. My name is Ana Guerra, and in this new setting, the fantastic Hay headquarters in Barcelona, I have Verónica Fuerte, head of Hay, and Claudia Laporte, our producer. And this change of scenario is not the only new thing this year. In this 2026, we are flying solo. Women at Work by Hay has no sponsor this season 6 because, surprise, surprise, nobody wants to sponsor a feminist show anymore. Oh well, I suppose we'll take advantage of the opportunity to be as outrageous as we can this year, since we're definitely not we're not doing this for money or even to cover the costs. Now, all they said, let's get to our main duty, which is interviewing another incredible designer that's already waiting at the other side of the computer. Designed with a soul and a multilingual approach in impeccable shape. Samar Makaroun, welcome to Women at Work by Hay. Samar, you're a Lebanese-born and London-based graphic designer, creative director, and partner at the world-famous Pentagram. You've got more than 20 years of experience across many fields of design and have spoken at festivals and universities around the world. However, and that's my first question, I read in an interview that your entry into design, it was a kind of a last-minute decision, wasn't it?
Yes. First of all, thank you so much, Anna, to have me over. I've been a listener to this podcast. I'm glad it exists. And thank you for having me join you. So absolutely, to answer your first question, yes, I think my entry into design was more of an instinctive decision. At the time, I think I didn't really know what the career would look like. All I knew was that I wanted to perhaps have a career in something that feels creative, while also being able to make a career out of it. And I grew up in a place where, fine arts was kind of not regarded as something you can do to actually have a salary and have a job. So to me, design was the best of both worlds. I sort of was going to register more in the sciences when I went to the university, but somehow I couldn't leave the campus and I decided, no, that's not going to work for me. And I changed my registration and I ended up in design with a completely ignorant sort of roadmap. I didn't have any idea of what my life would be like, but I just thought it was worth the gamble.
And how did you feel on those first years of university that your life as a designer would be? And has it been very different at the end?
I guess many things. In that specific university, which was the American University of Beirut, we were told in the first year that 20 out of the 40 students in first year will make it to second year. So wow. That the race was real and we had to work incredibly hard. And also coming from a place where I felt like I had a knowledge gap. So I needed to kind of learn very quickly, very fast. And also I had a linguistic gap, which was basically I went to a French school, not an American school. So I was kind of learning on all fronts in a way. And there was a fear of not making it to the second year. So that was a good drive, especially that the university was very expensive. So like for me to convince my parents to send me there, I knew it was like a big sacrifice for to pay that tuition. So somehow like I couldn't afford to fail, which was a driver in sort of working harder. To be honest, I just put my head down and I went with it. I didn't really have time to ponder what next year would be like. I was just kind of focusing on one step at a time, get to the second year. Lots of hard work, lots of sort of steep learning curve in a way, like sort of learning, trying to kind of understand whether this is for me. And also like I was a bit of a nerd maybe at school in terms of like my ability, scientific ability, but with design and sort of color and all of these things, this is not necessarily scientific judgment process, right? So you sort of have to tune in to the intuitive side of yourself to be able to kind of interpret codes and understand some of the things that we were kind of learning about. So it was a hard first year, but I made it to the second year just about. And then things got better in time. So it was, yeah. But I don't believe, I think I had a clear idea of what my life would look like. Because maybe I didn't have, perhaps, maybe I didn't look up to many role models around me. There were just the teachers, the course was new, everything was a little bit new. So there was a lot of learning to do.
We will go back to that point because I read something very interesting around that. But if you could go back and say something to that young Samar, like, what would it be?
Yeah, I mean, that's a hard one. I always feel like people, on a lot on interviews, I get asked to give advice to people. And I often find that with advice, people only listen when it's the right time for them to listen to that bit of advice, And I'm gonna borrow something, which is what I do often. Borrow something from a woman I'm currently working with named Sumaya Al-Hammami, and she's tasked us to do a brand for one of her projects. And I read in some of the download that she's given us that her dad told her something, and I was like, wow, I wish someone told me this. And it was that he said something along the lines that if I tell you that being punched in the face is going to hurt you, you're not going to believe me. You only know what it feels like to be punched in the face when you get punched in the face. So people learn from their own mistakes. We have a proverb for this in Arabic: you learn from your own pocket. So I guess probably if I were to kind of take that logic and think about it for a younger person, I think it's sort of, don't be afraid of failure, because that's how you get formed in a way. You're not going to be successful at everything when you start. You're going to have mishaps. You're going to do things you're not entirely sure about. You're going to question yourself, but ignore all of that and just carry on. And I guess maybe that's something, it does exist in lots of forms of proverbs and things you hear. Like we have another proverb in Arabic that says, don't hate, لا تكره شرا لعله خيرا, which means don't hate something that is evil, maybe it's good. And I think it's sort of this kind of idea of silver lining. In every problem there's a silver lining. In every kind of obstacle there's something you learn and that you sort of grow out of it. And that's what life is about. You're not going to be a fully formed product when you graduate from college. There's a lot of things to do before you sort of get to where you're meant to be.
I think what you just said is like a masterclass in itself, because there's so many things there, like all of these instant fame and success idea. It's engraving more and more in our society right now. Like it seems like first time that you go on a public sphere of any case, in any creative world, you need to be successful. And on that line, I was thinking about a phrase that I really love, which is you never know what worse luck your bad luck save you from.
Yeah, I think similar to this Arabic proverb, 100%. Yeah.
So I think it's there. Yeah. But if you had to like think about, I guess there's many of them, but one learning that you've extracted right now at this stage of your life and this time that you've been working in the field, what would it be?
I think you sort of, maybe there's an element of sort of trusting that probably the best work will come up from the best relationships. So if you have a relationship with a client who trusts you and trusts your kind of, and they challenge you, they trust you enough to challenge you. It doesn't mean they agree with everything you say, because actually that's part of the kind of working relationship with our partners and clients. And these relationships often make for the best work, because they sort of, design is very much process driven. It's the decisions you make across the sort of whole process to be able to reach the final destination, which is the finished case study that everybody sees. Nobody knows what goes behind that. And for the longest time, you have to kind of learn to say no, in a sense, to when you have an instinct that this is not going to be a good relationship. It's often true that instinct is often your maybe your heart telling you there's something wrong, or that is picking up on cues, and that often means that perhaps that journey is going to be fraught with the and that doesn't make for good work. And I guess like this is something that you sort of, once you come at peace to that, then perhaps, and it takes time, I think for me in the longest time, like I keep saying, I want to learn how to say no, this is not right for me. I felt it from the beginning, and then, things happen, and sometimes you do have maybe a reading of some cues as you start, and it's okay that not everybody is going to be your best client, right? Like I think people get drawn to people who think like them. So it's kind of a natural process of elimination in a way, and that's sort of how it happens. So I guess that's one learning. And yeah, many, many more things in my book of lessons. I kept a notebook when I opened my office. It's full of things I've done, and I say I'm never going to do again. As long as you don't do it again, it's fine.
No way, you keep them, like you've got them written.
I do have, when I started my business, Right to Left, and I know Veronica has Hey Studio, you learn a lot by doing mistakes, right? And you pay for the mistakes, so you pay financially for the mistakes. So I guess that sort of makes you more aware. Because if you're in a job, like your salary is going to be paid regardless of whoever's leading the company. So I decided to keep a book of lessons just for myself, to kind of remind myself, how to save myself the agony of things.
That's amazing. You should really publish that. I think it would be like a mantra for so many people.
Yeah, it's also like admission of a lot of mishaps. I'm not sure I'm ready to do that. Maybe when I'm like 70 and I'm retired, I will bring out the dirt.
In another interview, I read that when you were growing up, you didn't really know many successful creative female leaders. And since you are going to be one with your book, because I'm sure that this will come up at some point, and when you're 17, you publish that book, do you think the situation has changed for little girls and like young women nowadays? Do you feel like women's landscape is a bit more representative in the creative field right now?
Yes and no in many ways. So perhaps when I was growing up, success stories of women in creative industries were maybe defined as the exception or the one-off, and sometimes they weren't very visible as well, like because of the systems that are built around us. Today you see more women in sort of positions, or kind of more known position, and there has been an active drive, I feel like, in the last 10 years to a fast-track women, to support more women, because women were very, your podcast is a case in point. People are talking about this. It's very relevant. It's, 2026. So it's about time, I guess, or maybe way too overdue by 1,000 years. So I guess, little girls do see more role models probably, but I guess what they don't see is how hard probably these women had to push to get there. So it's not easy, I think, to be in to kind of get a seat at the table, and you probably, I've heard it maybe from many women working at that level, saying that, I'm at peace with the fact that I have to work maybe double as hard as everybody else. So it's not the normal kind of process still. So I guess what do we have to do? Maybe I would like to think that in another 10 years, things would feel genuinely equal, not necessarily, with that push. But I guess we just open doors and things would follow. Yeah.
Hopefully. I mean, the world is not looking very promising right now, but hopefully you're right.
Yeah.
Tamar, you're culturally half Arab, half British, I read, and you grew up in Lebanon during the Civil War. How has growing up amid such instability shaped your understanding of political responsibility and leadership in general, but of course in design?
Yeah. This is a great question, and it's also a slightly daunting question considering the state of the world today, with the Epstein files, with all the wars that are going around the planet. So you could essentially say, is the world stable today? Maybe not.
No.
But so you could argue, is this over, right? Like, grew up as a kid in the Civil War, but has it stopped? And I guess what I don't want to go into like depressing notions, but I think there are things that perhaps make me who I am by growing up in this kind of chaotic world. So I believe that chaos is creative. If you think of a classroom where children are enjoying themselves, the classroom is chaos. It's never an orderly classroom. And in places where things are not given in a way, or where things are not, okay, you don't assume you're going to have 24-hour powers. So you have to find solutions. Charge your laptop before your laptop dies, right? So you have to think about all these things. And also people find ad hoc solutions without sort of perhaps concentration on health and safety, because health and safety is like, a very vague term in sort of civil war. So that's one thing. And I think that's, if you think about some of the things that you see with how people make do, they're actually quite inventive. So there is an inventiveness to chaos, I guess. That's the upside. I'm trying to focus on the upside. The other thing is also adaptability, which comes from that. You don't take anything for granted. You don't assume that, you're entitled to things. Things happen and you just cope. And that's perhaps maybe a descriptor of children are better copers than adults. I think as when we become adults, become more and more rigid. But children cope better, maybe because they don't really understand. So they just try to find a way to enjoy themselves.
Right.
And I do remember, like, we used to invent games with my siblings and my cousins, and sort of when there's nothing, like no TV or like no power or nothing is whatever, something is not what you expect it to be, you just invent ways to play. As long as it's safe, you sort of find a way around that. I guess also another thing, which is the kind of wider, perhaps, context of civil war. In civil war, nobody wins. Civil war, the civil war in Lebanon, was a sectarian civil war based on religious beliefs. So it was like different religious factions fighting each other. And if you think about religion, like Christianity doesn't preach war, or maybe Islam doesn't preach war, right? None of these religions are fundamentally it's what people do in the name of God.
Yeah.
And actually, if you think about, the multitude, if you hold the fact that you're a really strong Christian believer, then you shouldn't be holding a gun. If you think about like people being incredibly religious, and so you sort of realize that people do hold multitudes, and the editing of a certain story, or perhaps the way you tell yourself a certain story, can get you to do things that sometimes are very at odds with your beliefs. But it's all about the narrative. It's all about the combination or the editing of something where you add belief 1 on top of belief 2 on top of belief 3, and then all of a sudden you're part of a militia. And that didn't make sense. As a child, you see it, you're like, why are they doing this? It doesn't make any sense. Like, why are people killing each other for something so, you believe in this God, fine, good for you. Like, you don't have to kill in the name of that. So in a way, I guess, like, you start to understand that people do hold contrasts sometimes, or opposing view, and that perhaps being comfortable with difference is a safer way to navigate the world, and maybe a more acceptable way to navigate, because the extreme difference leads to conflict that ends in war. So tolerance maybe is a way of saying that. All right, little ad break. There you go. Chaos is created.
Ghosts, yeah.
And I guess the last thing is sort of enjoying the moment, which I think that's the beautiful thing of like not assuming that your plan will go according to plan, because when you live in chaotic places, you have no plan.
Exactly.
So then you get comfortable and you learn to enjoy what you have today, because tomorrow might be a different day. And that's actually the perhaps main thing that sort of I think describes Beirut perhaps today in the way people grab time and life and what they have in the moment. It's a way to cope as well. Yeah,
definitely. And it's, we sometimes take our environment, our life as given, as it's something that's going to stay like that forever. But things change from one day to another, and it's a very powerful learning. I don't come from a design background. I'm a journalist, and I always think that you designers, you have like a different way of looking at the world, like a different brain, different way of understanding how society works. And I was wondering if your career in design has influenced the way you look at the world, like the way you look at this kind of narratives that you were talking about, the state of the world that you're talking about. Has it influenced it anyway?
Absolutely, and I think actually journalism or design or writing are very similar, in the sense that you are editing parts of a story to tell a bigger story. So your articles are sort of giving a point of view on something, using words or and some kind of documents if it's like something more factual. In our case, what we do is we interpret codes, which are maybe color, typography, language, tone of voice, positioning, motion behavior, to tell a story about a business or an entity or a charity or whatever it is the partner you're working with. And you try to position it to create belief in a way. So you define it. So it's the same thing, but we just have to do it in one little simplified mark that sort of expresses something beyond, perhaps a whole article. So your tool is Word. Our tool are words and color and shapes and motion and all of these elements that we decode into creating this form, which tells a story on its own. And the story will work if the form actually and the narrative you're building is believable. And it's only believable if it's true or if it's kind of close to the truth in some way or another. I mean, whatever truth is a big word anyway. So. But I'm trying to,
with all this background that you've been explaining and how you grew up and all this mix, how do you think this two-world, three-language mix, because you do speak three languages, has influenced your designing style?
I guess I work a lot with culture, but if we think about culture is not a fixed thing. It's constantly in flux and it's constantly changing. And I've done a lot of motion between borders, geographic borders, in terms of seeing the world from all of these perspectives. But I guess ideas don't have borders. Ideas travel. They don't really, they're not limited. And when you think about history, you can write history from one point of view, but actually no one can claim ownership of any one sort of form of representation because ideas do travel. So at any one time, people were influenced by each other. So is the design industry, so is the arts, and so is the kind of like people sort of interpret. It's a build on what existed before. So thinking about language, the first maybe perhaps portal of communication is language. And also traveling between languages, even within English, for example, you have the British English and the American English, and there's a lot of differences, not only in what is said, but in also what is unsaid. So the silences are used differently, the jokes, the humor is different, all of these nuances. And in Arabic as well, you have a lot of differences within, you have 24 Arabic-speaking countries, and there's a lot of nuance between these countries. And I find that interesting more as a way to navigate as well, to make yourself relevant wherever you're living and to understand the people around you, because our job is to actually understand something, to give it a form and to define it. And as I kind of lived through different places, I started to kind of find myself going back home and people saying, oh, you're too British, and I'm here, I'm too Arab, right? So you're like neither here nor there, you're in between. At some point, I was like, okay, you know what, I'm going to use this. So now I say where I'm from depending on who's asking, right? Or I say things depending on who's listening. Because as someone who's traveled in between, and as a creative, and I believe like ideas belong to everybody, it's sort of part of our sort of, that's what you look for, insight that nobody knows about. So curiosity through language and curiosity also through culture helps you perhaps follow a thread that will take you somewhere more innovative. So I guess it's that idea of also like, what is the language of emotion versus what is the language of business. So if you're asking my Arab side, I would say emotion is definitely Arabic, because the language is very elastic and very wide, and English is the language of business. And if you ask me in London, I'd say it's all in English, of course. There's no, it depends on who's asking, right? Like it's sort of, how do you understand being Arab, for example? So yeah.
Speaking about language and speaking about being outspoken, you've been, and because of how you see the world and all this traveling and where you come from, you've been very outspoken about the Palestinian genocide. And I was wondering if, do you believe political neutrality is still possible in design, which is a particular world, or has taking a stance become inevitable nowadays?
I mean, this is a great, very complex question. We could even like record a whole episode.
Yeah, I know.
About
Yeah.
the subject. So I guess the first thing is I didn't name what's happening in Gaza as a genocide. It's all the humanitarian organizations around the world who named it a genocide. So this is not my definition. Who am I to define this? What I did is I accepted 2 jobs. One before October, actually, which was with a charity named SkatePal, and they were doing. They build skateboarding parks for children in Palestine, in the West Bank and in Gaza, not so more in Gaza, and they teach children how to play, obviously with the skateboards, and in their mission they say we teach children how to overcome one obstacle at a time through movement. And the book was about language, and it's a collection of proverbs and words people like. This started before October, and it ended up having to launch after because books take time, so it was like a year of work. So that's the first project, and the second project was during it was the concert in Wembley for another charity named Together for Palestine, who we branded, and we created a campaign for that concert. And at the time, the ambition for that campaign was to break the silence in the entertainment and mainstream cultures, music industries around Palestine. Now, I personally believe that everything is political. I kind of question the use of the word neutrality, because what does neutrality actually mean? So either it means you're indifferent about a certain subject, which is okay. You're entitled to your indifference, but at least you could think I'm neutral. You own the position of being indifferent. That's one way. Another way is you're ignorant about a subject, in which case are you curious enough to find out or not? Another way of thinking about neutrality, who can afford to be neutral, is those who are not affected, the privileged. So
Completely.
I am affected by this conflict because part of the bombardment arrived in Lebanon. So I don't have the luxury of being sort of neutral in a way, or saying I'm above this. I'm not above this. My family is still in Lebanon. So that's one thing. So then the choice became, do you talk about it or do you just do it and not talk about it? And I feel, I have a personal responsibility to sort of not be duplicitous about this in a way. Like a sort of, we talk about design, maybe sort of building bridges, being citizens first, designers seconds. I'm kind of quoting the book of Raj. What is our duty as designers? In a world where our duty to humanity, not our duty to sort of political parties. I have no affiliation with any political party, but for me, I wish these charities didn't need to exist. They exist to raise funds for the damage that politicians have done over the last few years. So for me, it wasn't a choice to be silent about this, and it's not like I put it everywhere. These are the projects that happened to land on my plate in the last 2-3 years. But choosing to be silent about them is also a choice.
Yeah.
And I couldn't make that choice because it's sort of couldn't afford to make that choice. And obviously, like these are the beauty about Pentagram is that we're a company of 24 people who do not agree on everything, right? So this is not we're 24 very different people with completely different beliefs, but the model tolerates difference. And within that model, we all work on things we like, we don't like, we believe in, and that's kind of how the model is built, and that's how we learn from each other. So having kind of joined this group, I felt a certain responsibility to perhaps also maybe consider, or it's a charitable concert, it's not like a political party or a campaign, and I felt choosing to be silent perhaps would be a cop-out. And that's not me in a way. So yeah.
Freedom of speech in the end also affects design, because in a way design it's the form that you give to those words that are spoken or unspoken. What role do you think design plays in creating a fairer future? Because in the end we all have some kind of say on that. And do you think it can work as a political act with an intention towards creating a bit more of a better world?
I mean, I believe all design is political, and everything you choose to talk about or form or define or put out there, you can only do from your position as an individual in a society you belong to, or with the beliefs you sort of hold in your head. And I believe this is kind of the kind of question of brand identity. You're talking about identity, and in today's world, identities, I mean, everything is going kind of really far apart. You have ICE in the US, you have the Epstein files, where everybody's named in the Epstein files. So you have actual facts and proofs about all the people who are perhaps governing us being involved in crimes that feel completely absurd that this is actually happening. And what is worse is to think about the fact that they're releasing those files, and we're still going to work, and we're still doing what we're supposed to be doing, because people feel this general sense of apathy and hopelessness.
Yeah.
So I would like to believe that we do each have an individual responsibility in doing what we do, like stay in your field, your expertise. And this is where, what happens if we do give up, like in a way, sort of, I do want to think that we do have some level of power within even affecting the circles that are around us, even if they're smaller circles. I'm not an activist myself, but I also do read the news, and it feels like the world has gone to very extreme polarities. And yes, design has a role to play, because design shapes the stories we believe. Design sort of defines perceptions around identities, around different cultures, around how do you see this country or how do you see that country. So my invitation is to actually engage with complexity, because the world is complex, and to sort of try to find the connective tissue between complexities, because people are people at the end of the world. And if you talk to someone who you think is your enemy, you will find that you have a lot more in common, and the world will be a better place. So yeah, maybe that was a little bit of a speech there.
But we loved it. We loved it completely. And yeah, I was reading this article before, speaking about this kind of new term that just popped up, being the polycrisis. That every day we are bombarded with different kind of inputs of climate crisis, wars, Epstein files, all of this, and we feel a bit like overwhelmed with all this, all this information that we cannot manage. We don't know what to do with it. But trying to find that, I love the term radical hope, going for hope, but with not like a nice fairy sort of vibe, but more like a determination thing. I don't know. Looking at your career and all the projects and initiatives that you've launched, especially mentioning Right to Left, you have this determination, I think, to use language, as you were mentioning, to build those bridges across cultures through design. And I feel like you think, I don't know, I'm going into your brain right now, but like words and language are crucial to you, aren't they?
Absolutely, because they define things. So even if you're reporting as a journalist, you're reporting your selection of words. When you use the word, for example, defense, as opposed to using the word attack, right? Regardless of what the act is, you're actually defining the context of something. So the choice of language and words does actually exclude things. You could choose to use a combination of elements to build the world, and excluding, let's say, 50% of a truth about any one object. I don't want to use specific examples. So in a lot of ways, design does that. When I was living in Beirut in the kind of early 2000s, the biggest budgets were for political parties, and for about 2 years there was a conversation between two mainstream political parties, whose names I shall not advertise on this podcast. Were kind of talking to each other on billboards, right? So one would have a sentence, and then 1 month later somebody would reply, and 1 month later somebody would. It was incredibly effective as a campaign, but obviously the drive is to keep people polarized. And this is kind of probably if I think about like brand marketing, brand world, it was political parties that had the strongest symbols, the biggest budgets, and they had designers who absolutely believed in whatever this political party was trying to do.
Right.
And then from then on, you kind of can think in today's world, I guess the younger generations are much more savvy consumers. They want to know where this company, where they're spending their money, what are they doing with their profits? Do they have a sustainable, and they don't do, like they can work out pretty quickly if you're just greenwashing your company or not. So I believe like we're coming into a time where the future, or perhaps the young generations are more aware about their rights as citizens, as consumers, as kind of active participants in this world. And I don't know, I think I forgot your question now. I got sidetracked.
No, that you no, but that was perfect. Like you were using these words to create these bridges and kind of going through one culture to another through language, through those words that kind of unite and the choice of them. And I thought about this perfect example of your career being the Apple's launch in the Arab world. I think that was like something that everybody can understand very easily. Like you took Apple and turned it into, or opened it to the Arab world. How did that happen? How was it for you?
Yeah, so this was a project with the Apple team, Apple London Marcom team, with Harriet Devoy and Chris Duggan. I think for the longest time, Apple didn't have a store in any of the Arab-speaking countries. Right. They only have resellers. So that's kind of very interesting because some of the markets, obviously it's an American product, right? Yeah. So their campaigns are American and they're coming from an American point of view. And then when they got in touch, they were trying to kind of work out how do they kind of build a website that's right to left, what do they have to change? We were building a typeface as well with the Type Foundry from Amsterdam. So there were lots of elements to consider, partly because of technicalities of language and also like the scriptural, how do you announce the opening of the first two stores. So I sort of came in as perhaps someone who helped them navigate all of that in a way, and also like simple things like, for example, speaking to the artist Samir Saya who did the first two barricades. Their understanding of working with an artist is through an agent, but his agent is his gallerist and it's not that formal, you know. So it was a really interesting kind of looking at the sort of navigation of the two worlds. I guess my interest in taking on this project for 2 years was to actually make sure that whatever goes out in Arabic doesn't feel less than Apple's quality in English, which you see a lot in brands these days. You see a brand that's expressing itself really well in let's say English or Latin, and then all of a sudden when you get it localized in a way without actually considering all of the differences between the typography, the sort of translation, all of the elements, it suffers. It becomes a lesser brand.
Definitely.
And I'm interested in parity in a way. I think I'm interested in kind of achieving a same level of sort of you present in the same way. And I think that's important as well when it comes to even new brands coming out from a bilingual place. What I try to do is not to create like one brand in English, one brand in Arabic, and then a bilingual version, which is a common way to approach this. And I feel this sort of dilutes the identity. I try to create unified faces, like unified forms for the two worlds. So this kind of unlocks a little bit the opportunities of overlap and or maybe intersection or marriage or perhaps contrast. So if you create a relationship between these two worlds, be it 30% Arabic, 70% English, it doesn't always have to be 50-50, but the relationship is considered from the start, not as an afterthought.
But that must be very difficult, I guess, like how to, in languages that work in such a different way, thinking in those terms must be, at least it takes a lot of creativity, right, to create them?
I guess if you think about any bilingual person who works, let's say speaks Chinese or English, right? You don't know when you open a book which side you're going to open the book from. If it's right to left, it becomes intuitive because you can navigate both languages with such ease. So you don't know. Sometimes you could switch if you're talking to somebody else who speaks both languages. You switch language without even noticing. So it's more of an intuitive process that I sort of found myself doing to kind of look at the integration or the contrast. Because if you start from the beginning, it's much easier. It's not really because you're considering everything from two perspectives. You're not saying, okay, let's think in English because we can only think in English now. And then in the end, we'll just get someone to do the Arabic version, which is the reason why I started Right to Left, because I kept being that someone in the end where somebody comes and gives me a design to say, oh, can you do this in Arabic? Like, it doesn't work. There's no uppercase, these proportions don't translate well. I'm forcing it. It doesn't work. You have to think about this from the beginning in the two languages it needs to exist in to achieve that parity, or to have a same face, like as opposed to having two faces.
That's amazing. So, you're creating world peace there with that kind of mindset.
God, that's definitely. A big claim. No.
You're kind of making
my little circle.
Yeah. Definitely, but it is a way, thinking that way, it's beautiful. Do you think this kind of projects, they reflect your true nature, or do you want to share one project that you thought, that's me?
I think I really love doing Skatepal, the book, because it was a pro bono contribution. So basically our conditions when we say, okay, we'll work on this without getting paid, is we do what we want. That's kind of my number one condition. Like, if I get to do what I want, I'll do it. And they were interested in doing something about language. For me, language is a really common thread in my work. So we started taking all of these sentences and giving them different shapes. So we had 22 illustrations. And not having a client feeding back on legibility is so freeing, because like that's what we get all the time. When you think about like what is done to the Latin script, people are very playful. With Arabic, sometimes you have clients who are very traditional, so it's kind of really hard to push the dial a little bit to free the type, while keeping its beautiful proportions. This is not kind of disrespecting the script, but at the same time making the script playful and making the script free from the heaviness of, the religion, the politics, the kind of all the things that get attached to it. So I guess it was super fun to do it. The team at Skateful, it was about skateboarding, so it's all about like jumping words and letters and just play. We loved making the book. It took very long. It took about a year and a half to do it. But it's also full of little expressions that some are funny, some are cryptic, some I didn't know. I learned, that was really enjoyable because it had more freedom, I guess, more creative freedom.
And if you could ask for a dream project, what could it be? Or along what lines?
This is usually a very hard question. Maybe because I don't have the imagination of going, who do I want to work with? I don't think like that. I'm more like, oh, what am I doing today? That's how far.
Which is perfect.
But for this, actually, I think we're doing a dream project. We are working with, it's a new project, so I'm not really sure what it's going to end up being. But what it is right now is a museum in Antwerp, in Belgium, also led by, at the moment, Sumaya, whose dad's advice I borrowed.
Yeah.
And we're going to name it and brand it. It's a museum about culture, rooted in the story of Palestine that is being, like the land, the culture, the food that is being lost, but it's also being shaped. Like at the moment, it's just an empty building. That's what it is.
That's amazing.
So it's very exciting because it's almost like a blank canvas. And being involved from the beginning makes all the difference, although it makes it harder for us to sort of define it. But I think it's very exciting to be involved because projects like this take time, maybe 2 to 3 years to come to life. And it's even, despite your best of efforts to predict where this will go, it might surprise you. So, yeah.
It will look beautiful, though. I can imagine it. Like with all that you've done, I know it's going to be just incredible. And hopefully, we will be able to go and visit.
Yeah, absolutely. That's
when
the plan.
It's finished. That's the plan, exactly. Samar Makarun, thank you very much for this interview and for sharing your amazing creativity with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been a joy talking to you.
And to our listeners, it's great to be back. Please feel free to reach out and let us know who you'd like us to interview. We'll be happy to hear from you. Until the next episode, let us not forget about women in Afghanistan. We cannot forget about them. Thanks again. Stay safe and, of course, fight the patriarchy.
Yes.